How to adapt nutrition when injured to avoid fat gain and muscle loss. It's a very interesting question because depending on the type of injury, with the exception of probably anything back related or spinal cord related or maybe neck related, you can train around 95% of injuries. Now, you can't do your traditional normal workout. If you have a lower body injury, you obviously are not going to be able to run. If you have an upper body injury, upper body movements, presses, rows, etc., are probably all going to be out. But there's very few injuries that you actually can't train around. So I will take a little bit of a training angle from this first and then talk about how to adjust your nutrition because they do feed directly into one another. If you can train around your injury, I'd recommend training around your injury, whether that's swimming, adjusting a cardio-based machines like a cross trainer if it's a lower body issue. So if you pull a calf muscle or tear a calf muscle, you might be able to do certain cross trainer movements. You might be able to swim in a pool. That's what machines are largely built for. So if you see most machines in a gym, they're really designed for either rehabilitation, people who have movement or mobility restriction, or bodybuilders trying to isolate a body part. Generally, people do it who are beginners. They'll go into a gym and see machines and use them because they're a beginner and they're unsure about how to use free weights, but that's not actually who the weights were designed for. They were originally designed for rehabilitation, and then bodybuilders use them to isolate those those muscle groups, biceps, back, lats, pectorials, quadriceps, etc. So training around it's going to be important. The reason I say that is training, although is so key for building muscle, for helping with fat loss in a lot of cases by increasing your metabolic rate so you're burning more calories while you're resting, it's really important to keep your mental health and your endorphins high during an injury. It's very tempting to just press the fuck it button completely when you get injured and go, oh my God, I'm injured. I'm not going to train now. I'm just going to eat what I want. And then that can have a negative feedback loop and it can spiral quite quickly. And you'll find that your mental health will be decreased and you won't feel as good over the 6, 12, 18, 24 weeks or however long your rehabilitation period is. So I would recommend keeping in training in there if possible. Nutrition's a lot more straightforward then. You can take this from two angles. One is a calorie adjustment and a macro adjustment, and the other is an inclusion of potentially anti-inflammatory foods or supplements that might speed up the recovery. So firstly, calorie control in your plan is important. You're not going to be burning or training as hard with an injury, all other things equal, until you recover fully. So you might have been training 3, 4, 5 times a week, maybe in the gym, and you might still be going 3, 4, 5 times a week with an injury, but your intensity is not going to be as high. You're probably not going to be training as hard. Your body is going to prioritize trying to rehabilitate and recover from that injury. So you're just not going to have the same energy levels regardless, all other things equal. So going in and training means that your calorie intake probably needs to come down. So if you were eating 2,500 calories, for example, you might scale that back to 2,200 or 2,100 or even 2,000 calories if you find that you're considerably less active than you were pre-injury. So that's one way to look at it. Same with your macro split. You're probably not going to need your carbohydrates as high. You need essential fatty acids from dietary fat, which will be very important for reducing inflammation as you repair from the injury. You're going to need amino acids and the essential amino acids from the protein that you're eating. You're not necessarily going to need your carbohydrates to be that high. The real job of carbohydrates, with the exception of bulking up for fiber in some cases with complex carbohydrates, sweet potatoes, porridge, etc. It's really to give you energy. There's some nutrients and micronutrients in there, of course, but it's really to give you energy. That's the primary job of carbohydrates. You're not going to need that as much when you're injured. So you might want to prioritize going higher dietary fat to even speed up your body's ability to help itself recover. So you might look like 80% of your nutrition is going to be down to fats, dietary fat, and protein, and then 20% carbohydrate or 30% carbohydrate. That's just a general kind of idea. You can play around with that depending on personal preference. Then the other side of that is inclusion of new foods or inclusion of new supplements that might speed up your recovery. So you've probably heard of things like collagen. Collagen has some decent research around it when it comes to speeding up the recovery for session between injuries. You might have heard of omega-3 for reducing inflammation. These are all supplements that, although studied and a bit of evidence to support overall health and longevity, they haven't been really clinically trialed or stress tested enough with injury over a longer period of time. So I can't hand on heart say take omega-3, take collagen, and you'll reduce your injury risk or you'll reduce your injury rehabilitation time by half. I can't do that. Nobody else can either because it's not been proven to do that yet. but it's probably not going to do any harm. You also want to minimize your processed foods and ideally minimize things like sugar or anything that's going to inflame your body further. The problem with getting injured, and I can speak firsthand to this, is you tend to want to just eat whatever you want because you feel crap that you're injured. And you will go to processed foods. For me, it'll be chocolate and different sugary foods. And that's probably the time when you actually really need to bump up your fruits, your vegetables, your healthy fats, your protein, and be consistent with your nutrition so that you feel better. You're able to actually do the amount of training that you're physically capable of in the injury, and you're just controlling calories and macros enough that you're able to keep fat levels low enough, and you can keep a little bit of muscle. You're not going to be able to keep all of it, assuming you can't train at the same intensity, but you can keep a large chunk of it, and you're not going to lose it in the space of 6 weeks. If you've been training for the last 5 years, you don't lose that in 6 weeks or 12 weeks. You might feel softer and not feel as good, but you're not going to lose all of it. So that's a kind of a multifaceted answer to how to adapt your nutrition and training when injured to avoid fat gain and muscle loss. Hopefully it helped. If you're watching this on YouTube, on the video first series, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're on the podcast, listening to this on the Brian Keane podcast, make sure you hit that follow button. Thanks so much for listening. Catch you all soon.